So I've already talked quite a bit about the abiotic impacts of global climate change and how they'll be really widespread and diverse, things like temperature, precipitation, sea level rise, extreme events. What we haven't really talked about yet is how climate change will affect those of us who live and grow here, being on the Earth. And here we're going to talk a little bit, or we'll end up talking about in class land, those people who live on land, things that live on land, things that live in the ocean, and then also some more human-specific problems. Okay, so what we're going to talk about in this video in particular is how do we go about making predictions about where living things will go when the climate changes. So we start with what we know, essentially. Where is a species now? So we go out and we figure out the species or ecosystem ranges, which are broadly defined by temperature and water availability. So these are sort of thought of as bioclimatic envelope models. So things like temperature in the winter, temperature in the summer, growing degree days, how much temperature or how much precipitation an area receives and how much that species needs. So you essentially start with a bunch of presence-absence data. So this is an example of what a presence-absence data set might look like for a species in the US, with the green dots being presences and the X's being places where that species has never been seen. And then we've got on the background, we've got some temperature data. So we create a prediction map from that, kind of based on the climate conditions of where that species lives. And then we extrapolate using that model into future climate predictions. So where will this current climate be in the future? So when we assume that that's where that species will also be. So a species may not, in fact, occupy its entire suitable range when we go out and look at it. So why might that be? You've probably thought of some of these things like dispersal limitations. Different kinds of seeds may not be able to disperse as far as to all of the appropriate environments. Wind disperse is one that's fairly easy to get around, but if you have a bird flying you around as a seed, you may not actually make it to every habitat that you would like to be in. Same with sort of slower organisms, frogs and amphibians and things like that. May not make it to every suitable habitat. Human impacts can also have a big effect. Putting roads and barriers in between suitable habitats may mean that a species can't get there. And then there's sort of interspecies interactions, things like pests coming along and making a suitable habitat no longer suitable. Predation may keep the species out of a suitable habitat, and competition may as well. So these are sort of the three main things that we'll think about here as for why a species may not occupy its entire range. And so this is the difference then between the actual range. So when you go out and you measure where a species actually is, you can call that its actual range. Some people call it an actual niche. Or you'll also hear it called a realized niche. And it doesn't equal a species' potential range. So that might be all of the suitable habitats in the world for this species. Are probably not going to be occupied by that species because perhaps they couldn't get there, or they're fragmented environments, or because of competition or predation or interspecies interactions. Right, and there you have the alternate name for an actual range, which is often called a realized range. And the potential range is also referred to as a fundamental range or a fundamental niche. So that would be the niche or range of a species as defined only by climatic variables. Okay, and here's just sort of a picture of that. So as you have little sea turtles over here. Right. my pointer wasn't working there for a minute. Over here, and here is where they are. Here is some other suitable habitat, but only a portion of the suitable habitat is occupied, and in this case they're saying due to competition with other species. So, and here you may have, in this case, a population that has the species, but they're not detected by us at this point. So there's all kinds of things that could be going on. And here we have a suitable habitat, but they're not present there due to dispersal limitations. So this is just an example. Okay, so again, this sort of environmental space here is showing you the idea. So this was in geographic space, habitat distributed in space. And this is the environmental space. And we're just saying that if this sort of envelope defines the climatic variables for the species to live there, they're not occupying the whole thing. They're only occupying a portion of it because of dispersal limitations and competition. Okay, so can we predict the realized niche? So this is then linking habitat suitability to demographic processes, things like dispersal limitations and competition, things like that. Can we sort of connect this bioclimatic envelope model to population process models? And this is what a lot of people are trying to do now. So here we try to link these two models, climate envelope model and a demographic model, to predict future distributional shifts and extinction risks. So this figure here is showing you a climate envelope model. I believe this is in Spain. And then this is showing you that, well, actually they're not really going to be filling up this whole niche up here. There's going to be much lower densities here, and essentially they're not able to fill up this whole sort of fundamental niche. They can only fill up some of it due to population issues. Okay, and there are other demographic processes you could probably think of some your own, on your own, and you can kind of go on and on, right? So post-fire recruitment, maybe there's fire in the system, maybe there are other disturbances, and how do the species interact with those disturbances? We've also got, like we talked about, dispersal dynamics, and then habitat patch structure. Maybe they need a certain other species, maybe they need trees, maybe they need some combination of trees and shrubs. So you can kind of go on and on with that. The really important thing to try to figure out is what of that information is really crucial for figuring out where a species is going to be. So we have these two approaches. We have this bioclimatic model, which is a relatively easy thing to do with available data. And then we've got these models that are a little more complicated, using the bioclimatic models as sort of a base and then adding this demographic information on top of it. And this, as you might guess, is a little more information and time intensive. And, you know, as we just talked about, you can kind of go on and on trying to figure out what's important for a species, and there may be all kinds of things, and the key is really to figure out for the species that you're interested in, what is the information that is really important, because you can't just keep piling information into a model, at least not with the computers we have at this point. Okay, and then is there any other important information that you haven't thought about at this point? So perhaps soils and nutrient limitation, land use, habitat connectivity. So with the second model here, we're not even really dealing with habitat connectivity and land use issues. We're still just dealing with bioclimatic variables and population, like competition, dispersal information. So there can be a lot of other things that are important too, nutrient limitation being one we've talked about a lot in class. And then what if we're thinking about crops? What sort of limitations do we have in those scenarios? That's something that you could think about a bit on your own. And what aids crop production? And we do a lot of management of crops, so that can have a lot of other impacts. So they may have very different models than a species that we're not so concerned about keeping productive. Okay, and then I'll talk about this in the next video. So that will be all that we'll talk about right now.